the stuff that you had to go through to get where you are today. And then, like I said, we're going to take some questions for the audience.
And then we're going to dance.
And then we're going to dance. When the rock band starts next door, we'll be dancing. So I want to start at the beginning, though, because you have a very interesting start. You came here from Yugoslavia, right?
Mm-hmm.
And or Croatia.
Well,
I should know this. I'm like blanking
same
right
country.
now. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and I know your father went from, he was a manager over there, right? And came and then had to sweep factory floors, and you had very humble beginning in Canada. How did that shape your business drive, and then even how you run your businesses today?
Yeah, so you're right. So I grew up in a country called Yugoslavia, which was a communist country, and then it became Croatia after the war. And so, you know, my dad had the basis of communism is that we're all equal, which really sounds great. And I don't have a problem with that, neither my dad. My dad had a problem with the fact that if he wanted to work harder and get ahead, that he wasn't allowed to do that. So in communism, nobody had a better apartment or a better car. You know, the hottest car in Yugoslavia was something called the Yugo, and you couldn't advance in life. And that really bothered him. And he was the youngest of 15.
Wow.
And so get this, he was the youngest of 15, and his father died, my grandfather died, while my grandmother was carrying him in the womb. He got run over by a train. And he was the only one who didn't join the Communist Party. One of his uncles was like the mayor, one was the head of the police. And so he was the toughest guy in the world. And then he'd go to bars and he'd say bad things about communism. And in a communist country, when you say bad things about communism, they throw you in jail. And you know, most people would get the cause and effect. Oh, I shouldn't do that again. My dad was like, screw them! And he did it again, and he did it again, and he did it. He was in jail 22 times. And then finally they said, if you come back, you will never come back. Because they have these jails where you disappear and stuff. So we grabbed my mom and I, and we went to Italy with one suitcase, and we came to Canada on a boat. Not that my life isn't melodramatic enough. The name of the boat was the Cristoforo Colombo, right? So we land in Canada, we have enough money to take the train from Halifax to Toronto. My mom remembered she knew somebody, and we lived in their basement for 2 years. So that's kind of how we started. And I think it's a typical immigrant story. I'm not an immigrant, I'm actually a guy off the boat, literally. And I think what that does for you, it does one of two things. I think it makes you accept your fate in life, or it says, I don't really want to live like this. Somebody sacrificed everything in their life for me. You know, people always say you come to another country for a better life. The reality is, my dad's life really wasn't that much better. He had no family, he had no friends. He was 37 years old, and he showed up in a country where people didn't like him, they made fun of him, and he never really got the language. You know, it's funny, my dad always thought he spoke great English, and he would talk like this, and I'm like, what are you saying? And he's like, what do you talk about? I speak great. And that was really hard, and I think that always shaped me in the sense of a greater purpose and not making excuses.
So when you started your first business, I think a lot of people, what holds them back is they don't know what they're doing, they've never run a business. When you started your first one, can you describe like what made you start it and where you felt you were as a business person?
So the downside of being an immigrant is you tend to be too conservative.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, when you're an immigrant, you have nothing. Every dollar, every piece of bread is so precious that you don't wake up in the morning and say, how do I get more bread? You wake up in the morning and you say, gosh, I hope this doesn't go away. Like you tend to protect your downside as opposed to thinking, about the upside. And that's one of the downsides of being an immigrant. So I never really wanted to start my own business. I just wanted to have my dream in life was to make $1,000 for my age. So by the time I was 50, I wanted to make 50 grand a year, and one day have a nice house that I could pay off and buy a used Corvette. That was like if you asked me in my teens and 20s, that was a home run. And one time I remember I was thinking about starting a business, and my mom said to me, "No, don't worry, you're going to get a job." Right? Because as an immigrant, you didn't start a business, you got a good job.
Right.
And so the only reason I started my business was because a guy fired me, and I couldn't get a job in time to make the mortgage payment on the house.
Oh, that's interesting.
And so I'm like, oh my God, I have a mortgage payment coming up. What am I going to do? And I said, oh, I should try to sell this stuff. So I sold this computer stuff, talked people into buying it, and they bought it, and I was like, oh, this is really cool. And then I did it again, but I still ended up getting a job. So I actually got a job, worked at the job for 3 months, and ran the business. And then when I'm like, okay, this is nuts. But it's fear. Immigrants have an innate sense of fear because that's our background. Like, think how unsettling it is at 37 to lose everything and have to start over again. And when that's your background, it's really hard. So Mark Cuban, who's on our show, and I always, we hang out at lunch. And so Mark says to me, when I was 12 years old, I knew I wanted to be rich. Because that was his background, right? He wasn't poor, he just wanted to be rich. When I was 12 years old, I just didn't want to be poor. Like, I didn't think of, I want to buy a basketball team one day, and I wanted to have a private jet. I was just like, I just don't want to be poor.
Right.
And so I think there's a great balance between those two things.
When you were when you were growing your business, I always kind of talk about the leap of faith times, right?
It's tough, right?
It's
There's
tough.
that moment when you're like,
Well, and maybe you've had success, right? And maybe you're doing well, but then it's the leap of faith that you have to make a bigger decision or move
Right.
into another direction to that scale. Can you talk about, the path probably is there, but you got to go more intuition than anything else. Have you had a moment when growing where you were like, okay, I've got to make this big decision. I've got to go. Maybe it wasn't all laid out for you, but you knew you had to take that chance to get to that next level.
Every day I wake up, I have to take that leap of faith. And as your company gets bigger, that never really changes.
Mm-hmm.
What changes is, like, this year, I'll spend more money to run the business this year than our sales were 3 years ago.
Wow.
And so people say to me, oh, it must be great. You're doing $200 million a year now. It must be so easy. I'm like, what the F are you talking about? Like, I wake up in the morning and I think, oh my God, our payroll alone is more than my sales were 5 years ago. That freaks me out.
Does it still freak you out?
It freaks me out. It freaks me out
Really?
every day. And, so it's taking those leaps of faith, but I think what's different is most small business owners don't treat the business like a business. I think that, because I meet a lot of small business owners on the show, and we've bought a number of, in our growth path, we've bought 9 companies in order to get here. And so I've gotten pretty good at meeting a small business owner and kind of feeling, yeah, these people are going to make it or they're not going to make it. And the one overriding factor is not so much intuition or the leap of faith, is treating the business like a living, breathing thing. A small business is an extension of the owner. Mm-hmm. Show me a small business in trouble, and I'll show you a owner who's in trouble. Show me a disciplined owner, and I'll typically show you a well-run business. Sometimes you're just in the wrong field or external factors happen, but it's understanding what the business needs and the fact that It is a business. I run a business. Most of my competitors, if I went to them and said, hey, what do you guys do? They would say, oh, we're in technology, or we're in pet food, or we're in distribution. Before you're in any of those things, you're in business. Full stop. And to run a business, you have to understand numbers. You have to understand marketing. You have to understand how to acquire a customer. Then it comes, what do you do? And I know that seems like a really subtle distinction, but it's not. To be in business, first be in business. Secondly, be great at something that draws customers in.
Did you learn to do that? Like when you started, obviously, we all, you know, I know for me, I didn't know marketing at all when I started my first business. I had to do my research. So how did you become that person to be that strategic? Or do you think it was?
Yeah, I think, you know, I wish I was smarter. I'd probably be as rich as Mark one day. I never had the opportunity to learn. So I don't have an MBA. I went to school. When I was in high school, I wouldn't have enough money to go to university. So I go to my mom, I'm like, well, how am I going to pay for university? She goes, that's a great question. You should figure that out. I'm like, okay. And so I go to school and they run an accounting contest. And so whoever got the highest score in the accounting contest for the entire province, because I'm Canadian, got like $5,000. So I write this contest and I win. And I know, and so I go to university to study business. 6 months in, I'm like, oh my God, business is so boring. So I quit university. So I go home. My dad comes home one day, says, what you do home? I said, oh, you know, university, it's not for me. I'm going to go get a real job. And my dad wasn't a real lovey-feely kind of guy. And so he comes up to me, like right up to me, and he says, listen, I love you. You go back to school or I kill you, bury body in backyard. And I think he really meant it. I was the first person in my entire family, in my mom's side, my dad's side, to ever go to university. So then I go, what am I going to study? So I got a degree in classical English literature. And the reason I did that is because one of my girlfriends, I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to study? My dad's going to kill me. And I go, hey, how come you're never in class? She goes, well, I take classical English literature. I'm like, well, how does that work? She goes, you get a book on Monday, 800 pages, you read it, and you show up on Friday, and you talk about it. I'm like, what? And so that's my degree. And so I never understood why stuff happened until it happened to me. And so I'm always the guy that looks at the stove and says, which of the rings is hot? And then puts his hand on each one and gets burnt. But I rarely get burned twice. And so I think the quality I've always had is I don't have a very big ego, and I'm really geared towards success regardless of whose idea it was. I've never had an arrogance about being right. I'd rather be rich and successful than be right. I've never cared about that. And so I think whenever I've done stuff wrong, I've always kind of looked at it and said, wow, I shouldn't have put my hand on the stove. That really hurt. How do I not do it again? And so I've learned over time. And as your business gets bigger, you've got to react faster. So it's funny, the 5 of us on Shark Tank all sit around at lunch and talk about stuff like this because we're really bored. And we all said, what is the one quality that all 5 of us, if you dropped us off in the middle of the jungle, we're all confident we would survive? So what do you think it is? What's the one quality that you think we all think we have that would make us survive?
Drive.
We're all driven, absolutely. It's adaptability.
Oh.
You know, the world will not be won by the weak or the strong. The world will be won by the people that can adapt. There's a lot of dinosaurs that were very large and could kill the crap out of birds and other little things, but there's no dinosaurs around anymore. It's evolution. It's the ability to adapt. You know, life is about change and constant change. So if you don't like change, don't start a business. Like if you want stability and you want every day to look like it looked yesterday, don't start a business. Because you know what business is? Business, the best analogy I've ever had about starting or running a business is that game Whack-A-Mole.
Yep.
Right?
It's true.
You know, the minute you think you got it figured out and you hit the one gopher, I guarantee you when I get off the stage and go back and check my email, something's got wrong at work. And it's not what I thought it was going to be. It's going to be an HR issue or a finance, like, that's business. It's a constant dynamicism. And if you're not excited by that, and if your attitude isn't bring it on, you're going to fail. Full stop. So that's when we think about ourselves and how great we are, that's what we think.
It's a great analogy.